Good morning, President. I'm from France Television and since Sunday, many of the French people that we have talked to, despite all your explanations, do not understand your decision for a very simple reason. Many of them worry that in a month or so, you will be the president who will be actually handing over the keys to the country to the extreme right. So do you and can you assume the political consequences of this and the results that might follow? Well, I actually look at surveys just as you do. And since Sunday, what the surveys have been saying is that 2/3 of the French, that is 2 out of 3 French, understand and agree in a way with this decision to dissolve Parliament. So I don't actually agree with what you've said. I think coming back to the people is not something that one should have any doubts about. It's a democratic process. And I'd also like to reassure you, it is obviously a constitutional power which comes back to the president, and I understand your question from that point of view. But let me just say let us say that what we're doing is breaking down the hypocrisy and the misunderstandings that existed. How could you, after Sunday evening, with 50% of the French working for an extreme, say that we're not going to actually change anything? We're going to go along as things were before. You're going to say he's totally unaware of what's going on, and all those who voted for these extremes. And many of them don't actually believe in the ideas of the extremes. It's not the ideas of these parties that they wanted to share, especially the National Rally. They just wanted to express a certain anger against us. And I think that that's what raises risks for our country, and that would have made it irresponsible for me to say, well, people are angry, but I'm going to go on as if nothing actually has been expressed, because obviously that's more convenient. It's quite clear that if 2/3 understand the ideas and the decisions that I took, we could say that most of the political parties do not approve. And this is because they prefer ambiguity. Everybody saw that things were rising and fermenting on the extreme right, everywhere in the coffees, in the discussions that you have with political leaders. Everybody was saying in the press that the extreme right is here on the doorstep. Mrs. Le Pen will be leading. Everybody says that, but everybody is sort of pushing their ideas forward. But I do not agree. I do not wish to give the keys of power to the extreme right. It's not my aim. And this is why, because the French have asked for it, I am setting in motion a political action, which I hope will lead to them realizing that they are being heard. And also I want a government to be able to respond to their angers and their concerns. And the third thing is, as the President of the Republic, the day after the elections, as is stated in our Constitution, will have to face the consequences. I would have to choose a prime minister. But that doesn't mean that I'm actually giving the keys of power to somebody else. What I'm saying is I'm going to allow the political powers that have been chosen by the French to govern. So I think you are being a bit defeatist, because if people are sending us this message, then we've got to respond right away. And that's what exactly I had in mind. Therefore, I think that we have to clarify things today. Morning, Mathieu Courage from BFM TV. Since Sunday, many of your historical partners, ministers and others have been asking you, either publicly or not quite, not to really be at the center of the campaign. Edouard Philippe said this openly. He said it's not very healthy, and he's not present here today either. So do you understand Sunday's results as being a rejection of you as a person, as a president, and do you not think that you should actually stand back so that you not go ahead with the discussion and debate that you wanted to have with Marine Le Pen? Well, first of all, Sunday's election is a European election, and I was not actually at the top of that list, and I talked about my vision for Europe. Everybody knows about it. And also, I think it's a bit odd to say that you're going too far because you're actually dissolving parliament, but it's a personal problem that affects the president. It's not actually consistent. So the personal election for me is obviously the elections concerning the President of the Republic. And that was decided in 2022, and that mandate is for 5 years. And I think it's perfectly clear. Then the comments that are made and what is said in the background, but not before 2027. I don't know. I'm not quite sure. I think it's a bit absurd that I believe in the strength of our institutions. And I think that twice I have actually gone forward and has left myself open to the suffrages. And obviously, I'm open to all the sort of comments and criticisms that may come my way. But in any case, right now, we are going through a historical period. And so I would just like to answer one very simply by saying, first of all, the political consequences of the Sunday's elections. I have drawn the conclusions. I have said there is a real anger being felt. We've got to be aware of that and listen to it and respond to it. And secondly, the President of the Republic might want to set the course, but I'm not campaigning, and I didn't campaign in 2022 or 2017. It's the same thing in 2022. People said that I wasn't really enough on the campaign tour. But, you know, people obviously criticize you either way. So some feel it is part of the president's role. Some feel that it's not. Anyway, I'm aware of that, and I'm aware that the president is not actually campaigning. It's the prime minister who has that role, along with the majority that will be representing the group that we stand for. So all we're trying to do is have an open dialogue to actually bring together rather than divide. So I am not planning to campaign any more than I did in 2017 or 2022. However, I think as things stand today, in present circumstances, I think it's very important also to set the course and to also explain the method. And do you want to have the debate with Marine Le Pen? No. I made this proposal to clarify her points before the Europeans. I understood that Madame Le Pen wanted to actually act as if she was part of the presidential debate, as if having a discussion or debate with me meant that I had to actually resign. I think she should reread the Constitution before understanding or making those sorts of suggestions. I think things are clear, and I think it is here that things are really clear. Stéphane Lerner, West France, thank you. You have spoken at length of the situation in the rural areas, in small towns, the fact that there's a real anger, and that in France, most of the small towns, particularly in the countryside, have voted for Mr. Bardella, including in the west of France and Brittany, which initially was more on your side. And you have said that you've heard the people's expression of anger, that you have responded by the actions and the decisions that you have taken, that in fact many of these actions were not really perceived, and that you've said you're going to have a total revolution now, to express this more clearly, Copernican revolution. And so what do you think has not been perceived all this time, and what do you think you can actually get them to understand in the next 3 weeks? And how can the rural areas and the countryside once again believe in you or believe in your candidates and have any trust in what you are proposing? Well, I'll be clear. First of all, on the questions of regalian modifications and her decisions, take a lot of time to actually filter down. And would like to say that when you're actually trying to protect your citizens better, you're creating jobs, police, judges, magistrates, etc. Obviously, you have to train them. So obviously, the solution is not to find an answer in 6 months. And there is not a single area where there are fewer police or fewer judges or magistrates than any other time. But there are things that are going to change, and the results will be felt concerning minors, concerning young people. But what I said, what we should try to do is respond faster, have a stronger Republican response. I think there should be no more ambiguity on what we stand for. That's the message. And on the 5 pillars or axes that I spoke about, there should be no misunderstandings. We've got to be very visible, very quick and swift to act. And I think in these areas, these villages or peripheral areas where there is a certain daily delinquency, which is somehow perceived as being accepted and not responded to fast enough and not corrected. Then, on the question of secularism, I want to go further with that as well, apart from separatism. Of course, separatism is something that exists in many cities and villages. And then concerning public services, here I agree we've got to go further and faster. In all these countrysides, people would say they didn't have 3G or 4G network cover. They do have it now. Now, obviously, in politics, we realize that gratitude is not that common. But now that they've got 5G, they say it's not fast enough, and they're not people who are here quickly enough to fix electric poles. The railways are not actually functioning. And this is really, it's very difficult to get a doctor. So I agree, we have to go faster in these areas, and we've got to start off in a rather common sense and practical manner. And I also think that we should go actually to the heart of what you're trying to say. I don't think there's any panacea in 3 weeks, some miracle solution that's going to say that we're going to change everything, despite the fact that they've been in the past 7 years or 10 years. I said that we're going to be opening up. There are going to be certain tangible factors, but it's also awareness that we're sharing now with everybody. And I think that in the 3 weeks, that is as of Sunday, in this time that we have, during that time, what is really important is that we have to become more aware and aware of our responsibilities as French people. And this is what I am appealing to the French people to do. In the western part of France, in other parts of France, people agree maybe with the ideas of the National Rally. Well, then I would just like to say, now you must be a little more responsible in the way you act. This anger was expressed. We are aware of the anger, and we have to open up to other pathways. We have to be more respectful of those who wish to work with us, including our opposition, Republican oppositions. We've got to work better with local authorities and also trade unionists. And we've got to change the way in which we do this. We've got to find concrete answers to the anger that has been expressed, but also a way of doing it, which means that people feel that they are being listened to more carefully. But the answer also is that, okay, we've heard you on Sunday, and we can't actually be more solemn in our response. Now, expressing that anger, is that really something that's going to solve your everyday problems? And my answer is no, that is not the case. And I would like to say this to all our citizens who live in these peripheral areas, in the countryside, in the inner cities. I've heard your anger, but the project from the National Rally is not going to allow you to find solutions to these daily problems, because in fact they feel that all they have to do is get out of certain treaties and change the constitution. But what is the concrete steps that they're proposing? There are none. They're just saying, oh, things are not going well. They just represent an opposition to everything. And when you say, no, 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 we don't agree with all of this, they're sending out that sort of message or that anger. But it's not because they've sent that message that means that you have the answer. The National Rally doesn't have a response to this anger, to the questions of security or other questions. They're just expressing these sort of messages, sending out these messages without really having any way of solving the problems. And when you're talking about purchasing power, let me say that the National Rally is one of the parties that is really going to impoverish most of our citizens. Let us not forget that. And since Monday, you've seen what's been happening. Interest rates, have you seen, have gone up. The markets are going all over the place. National and European markets are worried about what's going on. So what does this mean? This means that your daily life is going to start being more expensive. Having access to credit is becoming more difficult. So when you have good financial results, that is the result of a sound policy. If you have a policy which is not really sound, then you're going to have a certain amount of debt which is going to be floating around, and that means there's going to be impoverishment of our country, of our wealth, and of our individual citizens. So as I've said, it's either going to impoverish those who are either pensioners or salaried workers or both. So how can they say that they are going to end the pension reform, and this is something that has been promised for a long time, renationalizing the motorways and all the other reforms. All of this represents 100 billion, so that's about 5,000 or 6,000 per taxpayer that will be called up. So good luck to everybody. So I don't believe in miracles. That's what I've said. And what we're saying is that we are trying to clarify points. So on the 30th of June and the 7th of July, we're not just going to say no. Obviously, we're going to say no, but we also have to say who's going to be governing. Is it the extreme right with their project, which is going to threaten her saving and her pensioners, and is going to impoverish our countries that have no real answers to the problems that people face on a daily basis? Or are we going to have democratic forces that are Republican in nature, that are working together, that are ready to open up to each other, and who are serious and sound and have results? So yes, there was anger expressed on Sunday, but by giving people the right to express themselves again, I think they will be able to be a little more responsible in picking up these ideas. And I think this is what the democratic dialogue is supposed to clarify in the days ahead. It's to figure out who's proposing what and how is this going to proceed.
Mr. Chairman, from France Inter, you speak of a vote of clarification. I'll turn to clarification on substance of a question of 20 billion in savings next year. Where are you going to find those 20 billion? Are they still on the cards? So there's a list. It's best to take notes. Unemployment insurance reform. Will the decree be published on the 1st of July? This taboo of tax rises, is that still topical? Can you guarantee tax stability for the next 3 years? What about projects underway? The text on assisted dying, will that still be implemented? Agricultural project, leave after birth, the New Caledonia project, Mayotte and Corsica, the merger in the broadcasting sector, the return of ORTF, and do you want to do away with the major regions and to shift their competences to the département? The novelties, because I think they're quite the large regions have done away, and the debate on secularism, the ban on the abaya proclaimed by your Prime Minister. And then there was a poster of your party. It was 5 more years. Here it's 3 more years.
Alors,
I'll try and answer the questions that affect our citizen more directly. I'm not going to preempt the election results. we're in an electoral process, so I invite you to have, in respect of the far right and the far left and their allies, the same quest for clarification. First answer, obviously we have to draw up a budget with reforms that will lead to savings, as we've done these past few years and as we already did with supported jobs. That's why I clarify things by savings won't be at the expense of pensioners, but budget responsibility will be at the heart of the government's work with allies if it wins, but it'll be the subject of discussion of all forces that emerge from these elections. Unemployment reform, it's important. It was prepared. Answer, yes, there's an electoral process. It must resume. Must it go before Parliament via a decree? We'll see that in due course. But this reform is there. It's important. The government stands by it, and I stand by it. It's not tax stability that we've been doing for 7 years. It's tax reductions. I'm saying this. There's a majority that scrapped the housing tax, the license fee, that cut taxes by 30 billion for our fellow citizens and 30 billion for corporates. It's not stability, it's a decrease. That will be part of what emerges from the majority. That's the goal of this majority. Then, if some in the discussion want to reopen a particular, I can't preempt that today, it must be part of discussions with partners, saying what the majority is proposing consistently on projects underway. I'd like to see them resume if the majority is confirmed, broaden with other partners. I think that for many of our citizens, the assisted dying project was keenly awaited. That on the newborn allowance, the draft bill adopted by both houses on New Caledonia, I've decided to suspend it. We can't let any ambiguity remain to give an opportunity for a return to order. The two last questions, there were many. I'd like us to give freedom of choice to our citizens with a goal of proximity, simplicity, ownership. I was struck in many regions, we've got the regions too vast. They have a sense they're being deprived because the regional decision-making centers for the elected representatives and the state has move further away from them. It doesn't make sense. I'm not for cutting them up in an arbitrary way as it was done. I'm in favor of opening up this debate freely and allow this freedom of discussion, but to proceed intelligently. We often talk about this multi-layered pastry. All our elected representatives at the community department level do a great job, but it's all inextricably intertwined, and we have a local level, and the community advisor with people who are in cantons and who have a responsibility at the level of the department or region, and we must complete the reform. There's territorial level, there's only one that's elected between the communal national level, then managed at regional level, but it's a question that's open. And with this simplification, I've heard the message from many in this respect. On secularism, a lot of things that we can do on secularism proactively. We did it on the Abaya through a circular notice by the minister. We don't need to change the constitution for tangible things like that and controls. But we see there's a situation. We have pressure on teachers. We have mayors who are under pressure for opening up sports amenities at certain hours. We have amateur soccer club heads who want to promote these activities. people who are honest Republicans and who are under pressure on the ground saying the rules are unclear between the demands of their citizens or family. We want clear rules because we have the impression that it's just not right. And others who say they want to live in diversity. We need to clarify the rules. I think secularism is a principle that protects allowing everyone to live together in the Republic. That's why we have to table these debates and not in an impassioned way, just in keeping with the policy of the times, but getting all the elected representatives around the table with a methodical approach to say these are the points that we're going to change because it makes sense, common sense. I know it's this is an initiative that comes from the Senate. Here we'll wait for the end of the elections. And do I think that we need a reform for public broadcasting? Answer, yes. Do I believe that it's a return to the ORTF? Answer, no. And I think here again, there's something between the hyper-privatization in the hands of all powerful interests in the ORTF, a model of public broadcasting that is pluralistic, exacting, and more effective. We can say things without caricaturing things. It must be resumed if the majority is formed to do so. Just picking up on the earlier question on unemployment insurance, is that reform to be maintained at all cost? And you talked about forging alliances before and after the election with men and women of goodwill, that you're not going to present a candidate opposite outgoing left or right MPs that you view as compatible, even unilaterally, and you are blaming both a bloc on the left and right. What about the regions where none of your candidates will be in line to be elected? Are you going to give voting? I'm not going to go into voting instructions. It's not my role. It'll be up to the majority of leaders to do that. I'll answer you on unemployment insurance. I think the reform is a good one, and so I stand by it. You said something that is intangible. We can't say it's intangible, otherwise it means that we're not going to negotiate things. The idea that we must continue to combat inactivity, to have full employment is a good thing. I think this reform was well prepared by the government, and I accept it. And the government is right to promote it during the campaign. I don't want to preempt what's going to happen after the elections. If some wish to improve it or change it, I believe in co-construction and that it's intangible, but I stand by it. I think that course is right and needs to be continued. Then it'll be up to the majority forces to define the arrangements. As to the rest, I won't enter the electoral ramifications. I mean, there's clarification that is expected by those who will stand for parliamentary elections. I'm saying this with great respect. I know many. There are many elected representatives. Look at the Republicans, the LR party. Want to acknowledge, I'm putting myself in the shoes of they have a chairman who's pactized with the devil, the president of the Senate, all the LR senators and almost all LR MPs, with the exception of a few, have said, not us. They've been clear, so they don't recognize the party line. They're going to have a moment of clarification to do. But We can't accept everything. They need to clarify things. If they refuse, they'll have a national rally candidate opposite. And that's what the majority, we don't ask you to join the majority, but let's agree on some key ideas, and then we'll have to make choices and stand by them. But either they must say, well, the Republicans are no longer those who are following Ciotti and his, or take an initiative. This is what we're offering. Everyone needs to be cleared. But if they have someone from the national rally and clear about it, then the majority will have to recognize. I know socialist, social democratic MPs who've spoken, Mr. Gage or others, they have no business to be with France Unbowed, LFI. I'm putting myself in their shoes. It's the same process of dialogue that must be started with people from the Communist Party, the Greens, of the Socialist Party, who can't even join this alliance that's not even Baroque. It's indecent. These past 24 hours, I was thinking of Léon Blum, because if there's one who must be turning in his grave today, it's Léon Blum, that we called Popular Front, an electoral alliance that will give 300 constituencies to LFI, to France Unbowed, people who've clearly assumed to not condemn anti-Semitism. That's not the Popular Front. It has a role, it has a history, a dignity, and so many outgoing MPs, people of good faith, who want to accede to responsibility. If they're clear, so we're not in that bloc because it makes no sense, well, then the majority will have to build with them. But on a basis that is clear, that's why I wanted, my role stops here, to say what are the policies, what is the, it's when the policies method is clear, then our citizens are not misled. The aim is to be able to govern what's unhealthy and what's happening. But it's a process of clarification. We see that the masks are falling, but it must be a moment of truth, because we can't forge alliances of horse trading to agree on everything. AFP, Mr. President, you said earlier that you didn't want to give the keys of power to the far right in 2027, but the RN that you fought against for 7 years is at the gates of power. It can win the parliamentary elections on the 7th of July. So can you tell us where you personally have failed over the past 7 years that we have arrived where we are? And will you appoint Jordan Bardella Prime Minister if he obtains a majority to govern on the evening of the 7th of July? I know that you don't like to answer fantasy politics questions, but I don't think really this is in the realm of fiction. It depends on our citizens, after all. It depends on our citizens, this process. I look at Europe in which we're living, more generally the West, the extremes, demagoguery are on the rise for some years now. I'm happy to assume all responsibilities, but in 2016, 2017, there was Brexit, the election of Trump. I'm pleased that the French made the choice they did. They did. AFD on the rise, a far-right coalition in the Netherlands, the rise in many countries in Europe, responsibilities assumed in Italy, elsewhere. It's a European scourge linked to the profound fears of our fellow citizens. If I thought that I'd done everything right, I wouldn't be standing before you today. I wouldn't have done the dissolution. Yes, I have a responsibility. I have a responsibility in the fact that, no doubt, I did not bring a sufficiently swift and radical response to the legitimate concerns of citizens, unease in rural areas, sentiment that they were being deprived, the fears, also the sense of slipping back. So the risk is to go to the two extremes, and then I see societies that operate differently. Look at, and I said this in Germany the other day, you were with me as it happens. Why are extremes on the rise? Why do we have 15% extremes? As soon as something occurs, it's blown out of all proportion. I was at Oradour. The great problem, the mayor of Oradour, when people are watching TV all day on social media, that it's wall-to-wall clockwork orange, that it's got to stop. Well, all that adds to problems of cost of living. So if we don't also have a form of democratic ethics of debate, it can't work. And if there's always a premium to negative reaction, to overreacting to the opposite of the moment, what triumphs is he who better conveys negative emotion. But it's not a government policy, and that's also why I need to stem it through the quality of our democratic debate. I believe you, as political leaders, have over the next 18 days bear in responsibility and clarification. Ask people, what are you going to do, with whom, with what money, to see, do they team up with Joe Bloggs or someone else? It's more difficult for the country, because tomorrow we'll have to govern. As you said, I've never engaged in fantasy politics, but I don't have the spirit of defeat. And what strikes me when I listen to the ambient noise of the system, and that's why I wanted this moment, is the spirit of defeat. People say it's terrible, but it's going to happen. But why? If people don't implement their ideas, yes, the extremes can take power, but it's not inevitable. I am confident in our fellow citizens. I believe the French people are intelligent. They see what is consistent, what makes sense, knows the difference between anger being vented in a serious project. They have an ideal. So I don't at all that the worst can happen. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool optimist.
À l'étranger, votre décision de dissoudre l'Assemblée nationale a été mal comprise. La guerre est toujours sur notre sol en Europe. Cette décision n'affaiblit-elle pas l'Europe et l'Ukraine face à la Russie
France and Ukraine vis-à-vis Russia and the question of arming? I believe in democracy, and I think that in Europe we cannot say that we want to govern despite the people. When you have 50% of voices, votes going to the extremes that are actually carrying this vision concerning Ukraine, well, it is legitimate to ask for some clarification, because otherwise, what legitimacy would I have? All of us are Democrats, and therefore we have to actually respect the choices of our people. And I think what is really interesting is that everybody in Europe thinks the worst is about to befall us. It's the fear of having the national rally in power. But our responsibility is to make sure that they will not be in power. And that's where we have to react quickly. We have to have a response and say that, watch out, people are actually going to be terrified if a national rally was to be in power, because their policies are not going to allow us to have any sort of sound government. So, in fact, what they do is there doesn't seem to be any question concerning real responsibility. So, generally, people feel that we are going from the idea that something disastrous is going to take place, or that the National Front or the National Rally is there and is imminently going to be in a position of power. But that's not the case. I think we have to continue to go for. You're absolutely right about Ukraine, and the National Rally was always ambiguous concerning its position vis-à-vis Russia. And as every European leader knows, I believe in democracy, and I believe in allowing the people to express themselves. We are not going to run our countries by dissolving the voices of the people. That is not the case. All we are trying to do is to honestly and sincerely try to convince our citizens so that we can have parliamentary majorities and governing majorities that will enable us to do so. So I think it's the right choice. And I think if after the elections the extremes were to win, I think France would be weakened. But if after the elections there were to be a clear position concerning the government, I think France will come out of this stronger, much more the stronger. And this will particularly be the case. Good morning, René Bruzin for Brut on Sunday. The majority was trounced, and your candidate, in fact, only got 5%, given that there were abstentions. Your score is 2%. So my question is, why are young people not actually believing in you for the future? Well, I'm not the best to answer this question, obviously. I think, first of all, when you express a form of anger, obviously you're going to say it against and express it against those in power. Now, the young people who've gone to the extreme right is a new phenomenon compared to the previous election, and therefore I think it is our responsibility to actually bring them back and to show them that our project and our proposals are really strong. In these youth and also in your publications, I saw that there was a real question concerning safety, security issues. And this is what I talked about earlier on, say that we can actually continue to uphold security with upholding simultaneously the values of the Republic, and also try to be more credible. Also, purchasing power, obviously, that is really important. Now, I have also stated the same thing. I state the same thing as you have. Am I ready to accept it? No. So I think that this Republican Democratic bloc should be able to then reach out to the young and say that the projects and the different points that I raised earlier on are actually really good for the future of young people. And I really do believe wholeheartedly that when we are young today, it's really paradoxal to actually protect the National Rally, which is actually rejecting the environment and rejecting the idea of a democratic dialogue. I don't understand how young people can actually go with that. And I don't see how you can build the future for young people based on getting out of economic and social proposals that will impoverish the country and get out of nuclear energy. So I think we do have a project for them, and we have to reach out to them. Hello, good morning. I'm here at the back of the room. I would like to continue with one of the questions that was raised earlier on. The National Rally has already got a Prime Minister in mind, and if you were to win, would Mr. Attal continue to be the Prime Minister? And also on the 7th of July, if you do not get that majority, would Mr. Bardella be appointed Prime Minister? And also, would you then decide only to deal with international affairs, support of Ukraine, and commemorations? I think the Constitution is clear on your last question. And let's not go into any political fiction. And secondly, I think it's useful that any project that we propose today be capable of being implemented. And obviously, the Prime Minister is the one who's actually going to be implementing these projects. And obviously the Prime Minister will do this along with the heads of the parties and the Democratic Collective. Now, my question would be to you. Who is the candidate for the group of the extreme left? I think it's Mr. Mélenchon, because in fact there are 300 constituencies. I'm just saying this because all those who have voted Green or Communist or Social Democrat, part of this Popular Front, are going to be supporting a Prime Minister, and that Prime Minister would be Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Let's be clear about who's actually going to be leading there. So the day after the elections, the constitution is quite clear. There will be an elected chamber, and depending on the political results, the president will obviously have to choose a prime minister. It is the balances that come from the chamber, legislative chamber, which will decide who would be appointed as prime minister, and that's the decision the president will take. Library for TF1 and LCA. Many French people are really fed up and exhausted by standing up to the national rally. All of those who voted for you in 2022 without actually approving your project, particularly the pension reform, feel that they were betrayed. So what can you actually guarantee to them today? What are the concessions are you willing to make to the right and to the left for all those who are going to help you to stand up against the extreme right? As I've said earlier on, I've been trying not to actually bring this debate or discussion down to that. If we look at things right around us and the political landscape, given the rather inconsistent nature of what's happening in the grouping on the extreme left and on the extreme right, those who would be proposed would be these extremes or a democratic collective, a bloc that would be in the center. That is the sort of question that you've got to ask. And you're absolutely right to raise the point of what some of our citizens may have felt, which is obviously what happens regularly between two presidential rounds. But the method that I have proposed today is completely new, and I think that that's what is being proposed. I have suggested that we should have a shared, clear vision based on these 5 axes or points. I didn't go into all the details because it's not a closed program. It can evolve. And I was also saying that all those who wish to join this group, either before the first round or the second round, it is possible to have discussions about it. And yes, there will be compromises. We're not talking about concessions, because obviously we're talking about action, and so it would be a form of compromise at some times. And this is why, obviously, there are things we believe in, but if you want to build a compromise, then yes, we would have to agree to that, and that's the big difference. And I think that this is also part of what was said in the results on Sunday. And I also think that all those who would actually get together should understand how that purchasing power, insecurity, immigration, the anger in the rural areas, the fact that some neighborhoods feel that they are completely ignored. So if we include all of that in our overall vision, then yes, we will find certain compromises. And I think that that's the difference today. In 2022, the presidential election, and that's the way it's run, was a way of clarifying things. And the legislative elections follow the same programs. And the majority, the relative majority, allow us to move forward, but using Article 49.3 and others, which are perfectly legitimate. But here, today, the method is different. What I am calling on. What we are proposing is to have a clear vision over these 5 areas. I don't know why this light has suddenly come on and why it's so bright. But also, there's also a real desire to group people together. It's not merely just convincing, and work together with the Greens, the Gaullists, the Radicals, Social Democrats and others, all those who wish to work together constructively. It's not just picking or loose. This is the last question now. I can also take two if you wish. Two last questions. I don't have a microphone. LCP and I can say that we obviously have a system of balance and alternates. But do you not think that if you're going to be choosing your adversary from the National Rally, are you not actually going to be breaking that balance and alternates? I don't know if General de Gaulle would have agreed with what you've just said, to be absolutely honest. I don't think so. I think parties or political parties may identify with that. The Fifth Republic was that actually one had to step out of the thinking of political parties. You should read this Bayeux speech and what followed. This is why I felt that we had to go beyond her. And I think that the method is very different, but that's because times are different and we have to respond differently. There is a seriousness today which requires us to change our methods. So if there were to be a group against one extreme or the other, would you actually say neither nor, or would you suggest that one should go for one or the other? And how would we ask those who are on the left to continue to stand up against the National Rally? Well, what I said, I was not actually going to be talking about these issues today. But what I suggest is that you should ask a preliminary question to all your readers. How are the voters who followed Mr. Glucksmann, how can they support a group that is giving 300 constituency to Mr. Mélenchon, to the France Insoumise, the unbowed, France Unbowed? How can they support these groups? How can they support an alliance which would actually put Mr. Mélenchon forward as Prime Minister? I think that is the clarification that one must get first. It is a question of ideology, and it is a deep position that one must understand. So for months, people have said we're not like them, we're different, we are for Ukraine, they are for Russia, we are different. We want to have a clear policy in the Middle East. They've actually justified the worst and have anti-Semitic position. We are not the same. We believe in Republican values. The others are anti-Republican. So, and I'm not also going to talk about nuclear energy and all the other issues. I think that needs to be clarified, and it should be clarified quickly between now and the end of the week. And that is that all the Social Democrats and the Greens should ask themselves, do they wish to be associated with people with whom they have totally different points of view? And I think that this is something that has to be accepted and looked at head on. And if they were to say we do not wish to have this alliance, well then from the first round they should actually build with them and not have a different candidate coming forward. I think there's a subject here where there's a certain indignity on the right, extreme right. People say there are real French and not real French people, and on the left who say that there are anti-Semitic positions which are not condemned in any way. Then I'm saying that on both extremes there are people who are stepping out of the Republican view or vision of things. These are not people who are Republicans by nature. And therefore, I don't see how a social democrat, a left radical, or a communist or a green can actually share their views with these other groups because they are not respecting Republican values. And I'm saying this openly. and frankly. And I think that this is important. I think all political leaders between now and Sunday should raise this question with their own groups. And I think the majority in the areas concerned should be honest enough and say, we cannot present a candidate. That is the way to do it. That is the only honest way of proceeding. And then obviously the voters and electors would have a clear choice that they can make. Mr. Royce from Reuters, for many of our citizens, the last time how the government had a cohabitation was years ago. Now, obviously, this is again political fiction, but you perhaps talk to us about cohabitation. What will the role of the president? If you had a Minister of Foreign Affairs from the National Rally, or a Minister of Defense from the National Rally, or a Home Minister from the National Rally, how are you going to actually manage the Olympic Games next month? Well, I think the Constitution is very clear on this. And again, I think it's incredible. You can only look at political games and the possible disaster lying ahead. What I think is important is that right now we should say, what are the consequences for our citizens? And right now what I am saying is that if the National Rally were to be in charge of this, what's going to happen to your pensions? They will not be funded, so there won't be any. If they were actually in charge, what will happen to your loans? Because you won't be able to get a mortgage. The credit levels will be too high. If the National Rally were to come to power, what will happen with our values? What will happen to our citizens who come from different backgrounds? And what is the answer? It's not communitarism. It is the ultimate values of the Republic. And that is the question we have to ask. Are we going to do this, or are we going to capitulate? No, I think we've got to react. We must say that all our citizens are clear, intelligent people. And we have to actually face this. The defeatist attitude very frequently comes from the elites. That is where it comes from. So last Sunday, I took this decision because I am showing trust in our citizens. I am showing them that I believe that they can understand clarity and vision rather than the spirit of defeatism and all sorts of political mishandling. That is the decision that we have to get forward and put forward. So it is the majority, the 577 candidates, and all those who wish to join us and who want to be part of the group before and after to come in. And I have faith in France, in its future. It is not a future which is going to betray its values, which is going to shrink its vision or its beliefs. We must be lucid. We must be clear about what happened on Sunday, but we've also got to be lucid and clear about the anger that's been expressed, and lucid as well about the fact that we will have to govern differently from now on, with respect, with calmness, with a certain sincerity in the services of our country. That's what I believe in. And I believe that this path is not only possible, but it is desirable, and it is at our doorstep, and we must acquire it. Thank you.